The biggest takeaways from the Buccaneers preseason win over the Bengals, that and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this Monday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers as deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com. Here with you every Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message, no ads or anything like that. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Plenty to unpack from the Buccaneers' first preseason game, and we're going to talk about the edge rush and some of the rookies coming up in just a little bit. But let's start with the offense in that running game that we saw on full display Saturday night. Bucky Irving and Sean Tucker both did a great job Saturday against the Bengals running the football, and there were a couple of different reasons for that. First, let's start with Bucky Irving, since he was the primary back to start the game. One of the biggest things that I noticed was how decisive he was and how he didn't seem impatient. He let things develop in front of him, and then he was two steps and full speed. I asked Todd Bowles about it after the game, and Bowles said that he was still going to have to go back and watch the tape, but that, quote, he had no jitters, he wasn't nervous, he hit the holes well, caught the ball well, pass block well, but I thought he had a first good outing, end quote. Bucky finished with 6 carries for 28 yards. That's 4.6 yards per carry and a touchdown that we're going to talk about coming up in just a minute. But before we do that, let's talk about Sean Tucker a little bit. He had a fantastic game and looks vastly different than the running back that we saw last season. He wasn't hesitant. He wasn't dancing around behind the line. He looked aggressive. He was efficient. And much like Bucky, he looked decisive. So Tucker finished with 10 carries for 68 yards. That's 6.8 yards per carry. And I know what you're saying. But James, he had one run for 26 yards. Yes, he absolutely did. And it was fantastic. But even removing that run from his stat line, he still averaged 4.6 yards per carry. Exactly the same as Bucky Irving. The run game with these two guys on the field was clicking, and it opened things up a little bit for Kyle Trask, who had a few bad moments, but overall played pretty well. He found Payne Durham for 27 yards on 2 receptions, Jalen McMillan for 23 yards on 2 receptions, Trey Palmer for 1 catch and 21 yards. So because of the dedication and, more importantly, the success of the run game, the passing game opened up a little bit for Kyle Trask. On the opening drive, the Bucs ran the ball on first down. Second down, it was a swing pass to Bucky for no gain. Third down, it was a bad swing pass to Bucky that fell incomplete. It was that second drive that got things going. And here's where I'm going to talk a little bit about the other big reason the run game did well on Saturday, the offensive line. They got into a groove, without a doubt. Now, Tristan and Gedeke did not play, but on that opening drive, the interior offensive line was Robert Hainsey at center and then Ben Bredesen and Cody Mauch as the 2 guards. On the second possession, the Bucs swapped out Hainsey for Graham Barton, and those 2 alternated drives for a little while in the first half. But that second drive, it was Graham Barton on the field. 8 plays, 77 yards, and a touchdown. First play, Kyle Trask to Ryan Miller for 24 yards. Second play, Bucky gets 3 yards on the run. Third play, Trask hits McMillan for 19 yards. Fourth play, it was a bad pass by Trask, intended for Devin Kolb, nearly got intercepted. I thought it was intercepted up in the press box. I even tweeted about it, and I was in the midst of sending a message to the insiders, or I did send a message to the insiders talking about how it was an interception. Had to go back and correct myself, say, nope, I guess it was ruled incomplete. But short memory, and Trask moves on. Next play, he finds Jalen McMillan for 4 yards. Fifth play, he finds Trey Palmer for 21 yards. The sixth play, first and goal. Trask has nobody open. He pulls the ball down, rushes for a yard. It was a smart play. He didn't have a lot of time, and they had the Cincinnati Bengals had incredible coverage on that play. He makes the smart decision. Could have thrown it away out of the back of the end zone, but he did have a little bit of a lane where he was able to run and pick up a yard. But then second and goal, Graham Barton absolutely explodes off the snap and manhandles the guy in front of him, pushes him into another Bengals defensive lineman, and clears a massive hole for Bucky Irving. Irving makes one cut to avoid a defender that was coming towards his left, and then it was straight into the end zone. We've talked about it a lot since he was drafted, and Irving showed it on Saturday night on more than one occasion. One cut straight ahead. Boom. That's it. That's what he does. Next possession, Bucky got 3 more carries, a total of 16 yards before Trask ended up throwing an interception on an underthrown ball. Hainsey had a bad snap on that possession on 2nd and 10. It made 2nd and 10, 3rd and 12. And then, that's when Trask underthrew a pass a little bit, got intercepted. And then Barton comes back out on the next possession, and the Buccaneers have run plays for 9 yards, 2 yards, and 7 yards, all by Sean Tucker. It was a 10-play drive that ended in a missed field goal. So it should have been 2 consecutive scoring drives for what I'll call the Barton line. Opening drive of the second half. Now the line is all backups. Wolford is in at quarterback, and Tucker just keeps doing his thing as the running back. 10-play drive again. Tucker had runs of 2, 5, 3, and 26, as well as a reception that went for 4 yards. Unfortunately, that was pretty much it for Tucker. After that 26-yard run, the Bucs sent DJ Williams onto the field to be the running back, and he just wasn't anywhere close to as effective as Sean Tucker or Bucky Irving were. But this is what the Bucs were looking for. 2 backs in this game averaging over 4.5 yards per rush, thanks in large part to really solid interior blocks by Barton, Bredesen, and Malk. Even the tackles did a nice job of sealing off the outside edge, the outside edge rushers and sealing off those blocks in the run game. This is a trend that needs to continue into the next preseason game and in those joint practices with the Jaguars that the Bucs are going to have this week. I'm really interested to see how the line does against starters with their own first team offense that provides more of a threat than Trask or Wolford do when throwing to Ryan Miller or Tanner New, which no knock on those guys. They both played really, really well. Tanner New put this offense on his back in the fourth quarter with some absolutely phenomenal receptions. But they aren't Mike Evans. They aren't Chris Godwin. Trask and Wolford aren't Baker. I love what we're seeing so far in the run game with the play of the running backs and the blocking schemes of the offensive line. And, 130 rushing yards as a team is certainly a good start for this Buccaneers offense. But what about the defensive side of the ball? That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users do not visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. And they're constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process quicker and easier. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. Get daily insight into the best fantasy draft strategies so you can win your league this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I've talked about how much I loved the run game for the Bucs on Saturday night, but what were some of the things that stood out defensively? The edge rush was underwhelming, but not discouraging. And here's what I mean by that. The Buccaneers edge rushers had 0 sacks. In fact, the Buccaneers defense as a whole had no sacks against the Cincinnati Bengals. But some of the things that I saw made me believe that this pass rush is going to be okay. Not stellar, not elite, but good enough to have impact on some of these games this season. The starters on Saturday were Chris Braswell and Anthony Nelson. Nelson only played that first series when the Bengals starters were on the field before he was replaced with Marquise Watts. They were generating decent pressure and affecting some plays without finishing, those plays off with sacks. What really stood out to me was when Jose Ramirez came into the game, and man, did he affect the game in big, big ways. Here's the thing about Jose Ramirez. He is definitely undersized for an NFL edge rusher, but he uses that to his advantage. He is so fast off the snap and off the line, and he uses that combination of the quick get off from the snap plus his speed and a really impressive bend around the edge to put these offensive tackles in a bad position. He drew not 1, not 2, but 3 holding penalties in the second half that had huge impacts on what the Bengals were doing offensively. 2 of those holding penalties came on third downs. 1 negated the result of a play being a first down. So even though he's going up against players much bigger and much stronger than he is still taking advantage of their weaknesses while utilizing what got him to that level. He's faster than all of them. He can get lower than all of them, which makes him much harder to block, which is where those holding penalties came in. He was getting around so quick and had such a bend to him that, he was getting grabbed up by the armpit and spun around. That's what he does against these much bigger players. They have to overcompensate for his quickness, and it leads to positive plays for the Bucs defense, either in terms of him being able to get past them because they don't want to get a holding penalty, or they're going to get a holding penalty to try to protect their quarterback from getting absolutely obliterated. The other thing to keep in mind, and it was something that I mentioned to one of the listeners that messaged me during the game, was that these edge rushers didn't really have a ton of help and were kind of stuck having to do it on their own. And what I was implying by that, or what I meant by that, was that there was no Vita Vea, there was no Kalijah Kancey or Levante David or Antoine Winfield or any of those guys that are going to be huge threats in the pass game. The offense basically got to play those edge guys straight up and focus any additional help that they had on the field on those edge rushers. They focused it on Braswell and Marquise Watts. They tried to do it to Jose Ramirez, on those opportunities that he wasn't being held, but it's not going to be like that when those star defensive players are out on the field. They're going to have to use at least 3, maybe sometimes even 4 guys to account for Vita Vea and Kalijah Kancey alone. When that happens, Yaya Diaby, Chris Braswell, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, Anthony Nelson, the rest of these guys, they're going to get mismatches in these one-on-one opportunities and be able to get sacks. Same with the blitzing Antoine Winfield Jr. Same with the blitzing Servassier Dennis. When they get sent in to do those things, not having Vita Vea and Kalijah Kancey on the field played a huge role in how effective those edge rush guys can be. And it goes back to how all of this is kind of a collective of the unit. You can get away with not having these superstar edge rush players on the roster. You can get away with hoping that Yaya Diaby takes another step forward, with hoping that Chris Braswell really evolves over the course of his rookie year, with having seen the development of Marquise Watts and Jose Ramirez from last year into this year, and not having to have one of those superstar guys. Yeah, everybody would love to have a TJ Watt on their team. Everybody would love to have, a 2020 Shaq Barrett. Everybody would love to have a Myles Garrett and those kinds of players. But when you don't have those guys, and what you do have is a Vita Vea and a Kalijah Kancey on the defensive line, when you have guys like Levante David and Servassier Dennis and J.J. Russell, who was pretty impressive on Saturday night, that can blitz from the inside linebacker position, when you have guys like Antoine Winfield Jr., Tyke Smith, Christian Izien, Tavier Thomas, when you have those guys in the secondary that can come in on blitzes and get after that quarterback, the edge rushers will see far more opportunity to win one-on-one battles, sometimes against, a running back or a non-pass catching tight end. That's when those things are going to open up for them. They didn't have that against the Bengals. They had Logan Hall was out there a little bit, but they had Judge Culpepper out there on the field. They had, William Golston played some, but again, he's a rotational guy. He doesn't command the attention of the Bucs starting defensive line. And so with those guys being out there, with those guys all working as that collective front seven unit, you're going to see better play by the edge rushers. And that's what I meant when I messaged, and I apologize if I get this wrong. I'm pretty sure it was Mad Dog that I was messaging about that, but that escapes me right now. But that's what I mean by the edge rush was underwhelming, but not discouraging. I wasn't disappointed in what I saw. I saw flashes, like I mentioned, with Jose Ramirez. Chris Braswell, he has a little bit of a ways to go, but you could see the flashes there. And there were a lot of times throughout that game where you had Braswell on the right side of the defense, so going up against the quarterback's blind spot, and you had Marquise Watts over on the left side, and then they'd switch. So those guys weren't anchored to what side of the defensive formation they were on. They would flip-flop at any given moment. And again, that lends itself to the versatility of these players. It lends itself to the way Todd Bowles wants to run this and not continuously give the same looks with the same guys in the same spots all the time. So it's again, I want to see how it improves from preseason game 1 to preseason game 2. And maybe with the joint practice against the Jags, we're not going to see a lot of the starters again in preseason. I hope that Bowles doesn't sit them for the entire preseason. I've seen that movie a couple of years in a row in Cincinnati where the starters just don't get any playing time in the preseason, and it usually lends itself to a slow start. So maybe we'll see the starters for about the first, 2 drives, maybe the first quarter against the Jags, then maybe into the second quarter against the Dolphins in the third game. But I want to see how Braswell and Marquise and Jose do with a little bit more help along that defensive line and in that front seven, rather than kind of being left out on an island because they don't really have anybody else that's a true pass rush threat around them. Talking about the other rookies and a few players that did not help themselves. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, brakes, rotors, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. It takes all the stress and worry out of the car part shopping experience. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Wrapping things up here on a Monday edition of the Locked On Bucs podcast. And I've talked about what I liked. I talked about who I thought did pretty well. I talked about things that maybe didn't pop off of your television screen, but are encouraging for the potential of the future. But let's keep things even. And let's talk about some things that I did not like on Saturday night. And I'm going to talk essentially about a few players that stood out to me for the wrong reasons. And I'm going to start with defense here and cornerback Josh Hayes. That was a rough night for Hayes. He got absolutely worked on a touchdown reception by T. Higgins. He got called for the pass interference penalty on third down that led to the T. Higgins touchdown reception. You could argue that that penalty could have been called on someone else, or that it really shouldn't have been called at all. But Hayes looked out of his element the entire time he was on the field. He was slow to react. He was easily beaten on a couple of occasions, and he just did not do anything to help himself on Saturday. Not when there were guys like Keenan Isaac and Tyreek Funderburk that are fighting for roster spots at that position. And Keenan Isaac came away with a touchdown-saving interception. So, rough night for Josh Hayes. And then speaking of position battles and disappointing performances, Elijah Klein, the rookie offensive lineman, had a rough night. Though this wasn't like super disappointing given the fact that we kind of knew when he was drafted that he was a work in progress, but there is a lot of work that needs to be done. He probably had the worst performance of any offensive lineman on the Buccaneers Saturday night. He definitely wasn't the worst lineman that played Saturday night, but probably had the worst performance of the Bucs offensive linemen. And he just isn't quite ready, in my opinion, to go into games in the NFL. And that's not a bad thing, unless you're looking at the depth chart and you see that he's the number 2 guard in line behind Cody Mauch, and you're asking him to go in and be on that line to replace Mauch if there's an injury. Then it's a huge problem. Xavier Delgado and Ryan Johnson both seemed better suited right now as the backup. And then there was Avery Jones, who came in as the center in the second half, and he is a converted guard. So that's a guy that could actually wind up on the 53-man roster because of his position flexibility. We know Jason Light loves those guys, and Avery Jones played extremely well at center in the second half. He's a guy that we could see making the team while Klein gets put kind of on the practice squad as they continue that development. And again, this isn't like a huge attack on Elijah Klein. We've seen what he did in college. We've seen the building blocks there. It's about refining them and getting him to progress to the NFL level rather than where he is right now. So I'm not advocating that the Bucs cut him or anything like that, but it was a rough night for him. Going to keep an eye on him against the Jags, see if he's able to correct some of the issues and the mistakes that he made on Saturday. And then DJ Williams at running back. Not great at all. Did have 10 carries, but only 29 yards. So that was more like the 2023 rushing numbers rather than what we had seen up to that point in the game from the Buccaneers running backs. Ramon Johnson was the guy that got into the end zone at the end of the game, to give the Bucs the lead and eventually the 17-14 win. He only had 2 carries for 6 yards, but had that touchdown, and even that was still a higher yard per carry average than what we saw with Williams. So I think the Bucs running back stable's pretty much set. It's going to be Rashad, Bucky, Chase, and Tucker. I don't see them carrying a 5th running back, but again, you're talking about trying to fight for a practice squad spot, or you're even auditioning in these preseason games, knowing that the running back room is already full. You're kind of auditioning for other teams to give you an opportunity if maybe they're a little bit more thin at the running back spot. So Williams really needs to do a much better job on Saturday against Jacksonville. And then finally, the rookie report. I've already talked about a few of them, but I'm going to run through the rest that I didn't really give a ton of time to. So Jalen McMillan, phenomenal job. He got open a couple of times where Trask either didn't see him or he wasn't the primary or secondary target, but looked really, really crisp on his routes, had 2 really good catches. Trask told us after the game that Jalen McMillan is, quote unquote, a certified baller. So I liked what I saw out of McMillan quite a bit. Tyke Smith, he did a decent job. I think he's the other guy that could have been called for that defensive pass interference penalty that went against Hayes. Overall, though, I thought he did pretty well. Finished second on the team with 5 tackles. He was good in coverage. He also, worth mentioning, he got the start at nickel corner while Izzian was starting at safety. Not sure if it means anything, but it's worth taking a mental note that when they put out their starters, Tyke was the nickel corner. Izzian was back at safety alongside Kayvon Merriweather. And then finally, Devin Culp. He got a lot more playing time in the first half than I expected to see. I actually talked to James, Mr. Bucs Nation, for those of you that are familiar with him, that he'd been balling out in camp and kind of deserved that opportunity. And I told James, I was like, that's great. I love to see it. I just went into the game expecting him to be more of a second half player. I figured it was going to be more of Payne Durham and Co Kieft in the first half. Instead, it was Payne Durham and Devin Culp in the first half. And then in the second half, the Bucs went to Kieft and David Wells. Again, not sure if that means anything that Culp got the nod ahead of Kieft, but it's worth mentioning. Culp was targeted 4 times, only had 1 catch for 6 yards. However, that 1 catch was on a 3rd down. It did extend a drive and keep the sticks moving. And in fairness to Devin Culp, maybe 2 of those 4 targets were legitimately catchable targets. One was nearly intercepted because the pass was bad and it was late. That was the one that Trask threw on the Bucky Irving touchdown drive. And that's 100% not on Culp, not being able to catch one of those targets. Overall, he did a good job, might be in line to become that tight end 3. Definitely need to keep an eye on him this week in those joint practices and then against the Jags in that preseason game. But and it's also worth noting he was evaluated for a concussion. Another bad pass led to him getting absolutely blasted in the head. Should have been a defenseless receiver penalty. The refs threw a flag, ended up picking it up. I'm not going to complain about the officiating too much. The Bucs got away with a couple as well. It's preseason for the referees as well. They're getting into the groove and getting comfortable with their different officiating teams. So not going to blast that too much. But Colt passed the concussion protocol, came back out, played in the second half when he had that reception to extend a drive. But yeah, lots more to react to and discuss coming up on tomorrow's episode. But that is going to do it for this one. Please check out everything going on over at bucksnation.com. Make sure you're following on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at JYarcho_Bucs. Please subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. If you're subscribed on YouTube, turn on those notifications. You will know every time a new episode drops, and you'll know every time that I go live. And of course, you become a Locked On Bucs insider by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.